Welcome to the Managing the Smart Mind podcast with your host, Coach Kramer. This is episode 66, How to be a Brilliant Autistic CEO with Maisie Hill, part 1. Hello, smart human. My special guest this week is the amazing Maisie Hill. And I can't even begin to list all her achievements here. She is a master certified life coach. She's a menstrual cycle expert, a best-selling author, and an autistic icon. And Maisie refuses to sit back and watch how the patriarchy has messed and continues to mess with women's minds and bodies. Through her books, her podcast, which I highly recommend, her online membership community, founded back in 2019, she has helped tens of thousands of women track their hormonal cycles, understand their emotions, and manage their nervous systems. And her work has been featured in major publications like The Guardian, the Financial Times, British Vogue. The list just goes on and on and on. And Maisie brings over 15 years of experience as an acupuncturist, a women's health practitioner, and a doula to her coaching and psychoeducation work. And that is something we're going to actually talk about a lot on the podcast, right? The sort of the red thread in her career. She lives in the beautiful seaside town of Margate in England. And when she's not coaching clients or spending time with her partner and son, you will find her doing puzzles, strolling along the beach, or recently learning to horse ride. Now, one of the reasons I want to invite Maisie on the podcast is that she has been a massive inspiration to me in how she shows up as the CEO of her business. Because I think we all have assumptions about what running a multiple six-figure business looks like and the kind of person we think we have to be to do that. And Maisie boldly defies all of these. So fun. She fully shows up as her smart autistic self and is just continuing to design and redesign and tweak and make even better a business that works perfectly with her unique smart mind. Now, during the first part of this interview, we dive into many things, including what it was like growing up as a smart kid from a council estate, how bored she got when she was studying nursing, and how then studying acupuncture gave her the perfect blend of multi-dimensional growth. We dive into her experience of writing her first book, how she dealt with her fear of criticism, writing a book with a toddler, all the things. We also dive into the importance of letting experts do their thing, how being autistic influences her life and relationships and what that looks like, and how to keep a sense of core identity when you're actually constantly growing and evolving, learning new things and morphing into new incarnations of yourself. I think a lot of you are going to recognize this, right? So enjoy this first part of my interview with Maisie Hill. Hello and welcome, Maisie Hill. So good to have you.
It's so great to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation all day and indeed for many days, whilst you've been very patient and understanding with my struggles to schedule things.
Scheduling, for sure. Listen, we're going to jump straight in because I would love to hear what your experience was like being smart in school. Tell me a bit more about that.
Interesting. So I absolutely loved school. Like I loved learning. You know, there were subjects I struggled in or just wasn't interested in, but the stuff that I was into, I was very into. And like one of my core memories is I remember because I went to school, I'm 42. And I was in secondary school in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And there was still, there was definitely a lot of stigma about divorced parents.
Right.
And my parents were divorced we lived on a council estate, we received government support, you know. And I remember my science teacher like being amazed that I'd learned the like periodic table.
Oh, right.
Right.
They just assumed you wouldn't be able to do anything because you lived on a council estate.
Yes. And she used it as like a point to others, like, well, if she can do this, then you should all be able to.
Charming.
You know. And then another science teacher I remember correcting, because he was talking about vasodilation, vasoconstriction, and he mixed up the terms. And I was like, sir, don't you mean, you know, vasodilation? And he was like, oh, and he was really happy about it, like to be pulled up on that. But I think that's like a very, for me, it's like a strong, it's how autism expresses itself in me. There's like something that's incorrect and I have to correct it if I know what it really is. So there was that. There was also like the very painful memories of doing a reading test at like age 7 and getting one word wrong and like being bothered by that for decades afterwards.
Devastated, basically. Yeah.
It was tongue. I was like, Tongue, I think is how I said it. And so I was, you know, had a lot of that perfectionism and real like needing to get it right and it feeling very intolerable to get things incorrect. And, you know, all the emotional challenges of like not really fitting in, but I did kind of fit in with lots of groups of people. But I just didn't stick with any one group. So I do kind of 2 weeks with these people and a bit of a chameleon, you know, kind of over here a bit, never really being quite settled.
By the way, a very smart strategy.
Yes. Yeah. Very smart. Lots of, the emotional turmoil, the sensory hell of lunch breaks, and you know, it's literally only in the last week that I've put this together that I was struggling to eat at lunch.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of anorexia, bulimia, eating disorders kind of coming, like getting a lot of attention in the press. Like this is an issue that we're seeing in our young people. And I was struggling to eat lunch. So, you know, your only frame of reference is anorexia and bulimia. And I remember speaking to school friends saying, I think I might be anorexic because I'm struggling to eat. And I was always very slim, prone to fainting, you know, it kind of like tick, tick, tick kind of fits the boxes. And they went to my form tutor and said, you know, we're worried about her. And the teacher said, right, you're going to eat lunch with me every day.
Okay.
And so I would join the queue with her as a teacher, skip past all of my classmates and peers, get the food, go back to the classroom, eat with her. And I did this for like a year.
Wow.
And it was great.
Because not all the noise and not all
like, no, you know, it just reduced that sensory burden that would happen in every break, and the unsurety of where do I sit, the noise, you know, all of those things. It was like a controlled environment. I go to this place. And because now what I realize is when I'm dysregulated, what I can eat reduces in terms of options, and I go for the foods that are safe. So even though if I'm regulated, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to roast some tender stem broccoli and I'll make that tahini dressing, and I enjoy a rich and varied diet. But when I'm dysregulated, it's mashed potatoes or it's macaroni cheese, but with a very particular type of pasta, and it has to be that type of pasta from a particular shop. It's like the options get narrower. And I've only just put that together like in the last week. And so I'm just sitting in the, oh, that's what that was.
Right. That makes perfect sense now in hindsight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were you like singled out as super smart? I mean, were you in like a gifted program or something like that?
No, I wasn't. I think I didn't fit neatly into that box, because I was on the student council and, protesting, why can't girls wear trousers all year long? Why do we have to wait for the school to tell us it's cold enough you can wear trousers?
Yeah.
So I was like, I think I was a bit too outspoken and rebellious to fit into that. And I did well in some subjects, but not so well.
Right, not across the board.
Yeah, not so well that someone would be like, wow, she's really got something here, and we want to nurture that. But, surprising things would happen. Like there would be, I wasn't studying drama, didn't have much interest in it. And a friend of mine wanted to audition for the school play, which was like a big production that the school did every year. And it was My Fair Lady, and he was auditioning, and he's like, will you audition with me? Just for support. And I was like, yeah, sure. I freaking got the main part, like the lead.
Yeah.
But I think there is that confidence in putting myself out there in like very social, very public ways that I feel very comfortable with. One-on-ones I feel very comfortable with. Group settings, more of a challenge.
Yeah.
Like a dinner table filled with people, or those kind of social things. I'd rather not.
Interesting.
I'd rather not.
Yeah. Same. 100%. So listen, did you know in school what you wanted to do after you finished?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, smart human. You're probably listening to this podcast because you want to learn how to manage that smart mind of yours. And the first step is actually getting your bearings, doing a little brain audit. And I have the perfect tool for that, the Mapping Your Unique Brain Workbook. And you can actually download it for free at www.coachkramer.org/brainmap. So that's coachkramer.org/brainmap. Go check it out and play with it and take your first step to managing your smart mind.
Yes, but that changed all the time.
So what did you end up doing straight after?
So I was really torn doing my GCSEs to secondary school. It's like, do I really focus on science or art? And I actually did a real mixture of things. Then A-levels at college, I started off doing biology, chemistry, physics, because I really wanted to go into forensic pathology, because now I realize I used to read the I forget, Patricia Cornwell books, and now I know, I was just like hyper focused on a character from those books, but I really wanted that for my life, right? So I was like, these are the subjects I do. I really struggled in them. So I did a lot of reshuffling of subjects, and I ended up doing biology, religious studies, and then sociology. And the sociology was an accelerated program that was 2 years of study into 9 months. And I think it was the only time that they ran it. And I loved it. Like it was like 3 lessons were in one.
Perfect.
So it was just like a real pace, like a real, I just loved it. I really loved it.
It was fast enough to not be bored all the time. basically.
Yes. Yeah. So then after that, because I was working as a healthcare assistant and doing HIV related work. And so I went to King's. We have that in common.
Oh my God. Did I know this?
No.
I was going to say, it's insane.
So I went to King's to study nursing. I was so bored.
Yeah.
So bored because, the people who enter nursing are coming from all walks of life, all educational backgrounds. So that kind of foundational year has to be suitable for everyone.
Very basic. Yeah.
And I was like, I couldn't even write an essay because it was like an essay about blood pressure. And I was like,
Please.
what?
Yes.
So I dropped out. Then what did I do? Then I went back to working as a healthcare assistant. I was working in a psychiatric hospital for young people, very challenging. I absolutely loved it. And then I moved to Denmark and lived there for a bit, came back and did anthropology at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies. But right before I started, I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and I was a few blocks away. So I went through all of that, came back, wasn't really up for getting my teeth into anthropology. So I switched to art, history of art and architecture, I think, for Africa and Asia. But again, it was like, I think that was the opposite. It was so far over my head, like the expectation, the level of study was just like a level I hadn't experienced, and I couldn't find my way into it. I was drowning in it. And then I moved to New York and studied fine art there.
Wow.
And then came back to the UK, and then that's when I really started getting into what ended up being my career in massage, reflexology, working as a birth doula, and then eventually doing a 4-year degree in Chinese medicine acupuncture.
But listen, you have to bridge the gap here, because how do you go from studying fine art in New York to wanting to become a birth doula?
Well, I think when I was in New York, that final year that I was there, I had a relationship, and I'd left the marriage, and I was kind of like wandering around, drinking quite a lot of whiskey, eating a lot of pizza, and just like hanging out in bookstores in quite a kind of desperate emotional state, I think. And it was just like bookstores were the safe place for me to go and be.
Refuge.
Yeah. And so I would just be picking up books and reading them. And I was reading books about the menstrual cycle and fertility. And, one of them spoke about doulas. And I was like, this sounds amazing. You get to help women give birth, but, it's not from the medical point of view in the way that midwife is. And so I looked at doing the training there. But at that time, they were very much like, you have to have kids yourself.
Before you can become a doula.
Yeah. And I was like 22, didn't even want kids at that point. And so I couldn't find my way into it. So I just kind of parked it as something that maybe I'd do in the future. But then I ended up moving back. I was managing a infamous rock bar in Soho, and like babysitting drunk musicians, basically.
Lots of great stories there, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, plenty. But I knew that life wasn't for me long term, but I didn't know what was. And so I just started doing all sorts. So I would do I did an RHS gardening course, I did like all these things because I was like, I'll just see what sticks. And, but when I had been in college, my mum had been training in aromatherapy and reflexology. So we'd helped each other study a lot. So I had a kind of soft knowledge already from helping her study of a lot of these modalities. And so I just thought, I'll give that a go. And I loved it, because for me it's like a blend of art and science, and I think that's what I'd always struggled with, was like, do I do the science or do I do the art? And so learning these things, and then particularly with acupuncture and everything you have to know in order to practice that, from the Chinese medicine theory and the kind of theoretical concepts there, knowledge of anatomy and physiology, interaction
I think
with
people
drug
really underestimate how much you need to learn before you get to stick needles into people.
It's huge. I mean, there's plenty of people out there who don't do that training and call themselves acupuncturists, but but it has a very high dropout rate. 50% of people drop out in an acupuncture degree, because what you have to learn, practice, be able to do, it is a very high standard, which of course was like perfect for me.
Exactly. And I think there's so many challenging things there. It's a different culture, different language. Like, it's a basis of the whole tradition and technique. Then there's like the sort of science, and there's the physical application, the skill, right? Yeah. There's so many dimensions to it.
Learning all the points, knowing how to describe the anatomical position of those points, what they do, like, it's endless. And that's why I picked acupuncture, because I knew I'd never be bored with it. There was always going to be something to learn, something to study, a new approach to consider. You know, it would just be like this continual puzzle that just keeps going and going.
Perfect. And didn't you get to go to China as well?
Yeah, I did. I did a semester in China there, because it was like, this program was run in conjunction basically with an arm of the Chinese government in terms of the educational side of things. So we did a semester in the hospitals there, working with a neurologist, you know, so there you're like really seeing integrative medicine in terms of, like, you know, he's sending people off for MRIs one minute and telling them they've got a tumor or Parkinson's, and then putting needles in them the next minute.
Amazing.
So, you know, really using all the medicine that's available.
The best of all worlds.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So good. And then you came back and you were an acupuncturist.
Yeah. And I did that for a bit, and I loved it, and I did it very well. And so all throughout this time, I was just very focused on hormones, the reproductive system, supporting people who had menstrual health issues, fertility issues, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, perimenopause. Like, that was
that already started.
Yeah. So that had started right when I started getting into all of these things. It was already there. It was already a thing for me. And then it just I just geeked out on it more and more and more, you know, became more and more well known for it. And then, you know, started doing workshops, online courses, that kind of thing. And then I got a book deal, wrote the first book.
Okay, stop. You, quote unquote, got a book deal. I mean, someone called you and said, Maisie, write a book. I mean, please, girl.
Basically, yeah.
How did this happen?
How did it happen? So I had worked on a yoga retreat for someone in Turkey as a practitioner. They were like, do you want to come away, work in the sun for a week? You know, like, sure. So I went off, did that. One of the people who was there is like in publishing. And, you know, so years later, meanwhile, you know, she'd been sending me like her cousin to treat, and you know, so I'd been helping people conceive that she knew, and all of these things. And just one day, well, actually, I had set an intention for this year. Like, I'd had a kid by this point, and I just thought, one year, I want to get a book deal by the end of this year.
Amazing.
And in my head, I was thinking that means I need to write and publish like a blog every week, because then I'm building the skill, I'm building material, more and more people discover me. You know, that's the logical way of doing things. But I also had a 9-month-old.
Yeah.
And we just moved to a new place, and Paul was working to pay the bills, and finding that time to do that writing was just so I just remember that time being really frustrating, because I knew there was something for me to be doing and I couldn't quite make it happen. But it's like that kind of frustration that works you in like the best of ways.
Yes.
Yeah,
that you mean that makes you so hungry.
Yes. Yeah. And I would just be up breastfeeding Nelson at night, writing things in my head, but never actually getting to write them down anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was like the August, September time, I got an email out of the blue from this woman saying, a colleague and I would love to come down to Margate and talk to you about writing a book for this big publishing house. And I was like, what the fuck do I do? What the fuck do I do? I don't know what to do now. So I messaged a friend of mine who's an author and just told her, and she's like, don't talk to anyone. She's like, you need an agent.
Anything, don't do anything.
Yeah, she's like, don't talk to anyone, get an agent. She's like, I can introduce you to my agent. So this then classic autism, I didn't know I was autistic then, but classic autism, this agent's then like basically hounding me. Do you actually want to meet me? Are we going to have this conversation? Because I'm just like, as you have experienced, unable to book in with me for anything. Yeah. And then we did finally meet, and she was like, yeah, I'd love to work with you. And I was like, yes, let's do this. And she's like, how quickly do you think you can write a proposal? And so I met with her, I think in the start of December, and I wrote the proposal over the next 6 weeks. She edited it, sent it off, and we, had several offers, but we ended up going with not the person who had originally reached out to me. And I got a book deal with Bloomsbury, who have been just amazing.
Wonderful. And I think what I love about this is that you basically were already writing the book, right? You did the prep work during that year in a way. Somehow you knew to do that. And then.
Yeah. And it was just, I think I just always had the belief from a very young age that it was in me to be able to write a book. Like that didn't feel like an outlandish thing to do. Mm-hmm. It just felt like a very reasonable thing to be able to do. And then it's just so, when you're working as a practitioner, you've said these things so many times, you've drawn diagrams for so many clients, you've hosted workshops, and you just start to realize, or like not realize, but ask yourself, how can I get this across to more people?
I think
you're drawing diagrams
about, like, you're repeating a thing and you're thinking, okay, this could be more efficient, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And what was it like having your first book published? I mean, did you have like perfectionism and freak out about like finishing it and picking the cover? Because I know when you work with a publisher, you don't always get a say in everything you may want to get a say in or have an opinion about.
I have to say, I really feel like I got the golden ticket with my publishers, because I don't know other people who've had the experiences that I've had in lots of ways, in terms of choice, level of trust that they've had in me over things, the way they've questioned and interrogated drafts and being like, what do you mean by this? What, and they've really brought out the best in me, but they've also trusted me when I've gone, listen, if I answer that question, it's going to be an extra 10 pages and I don't think it's going to be valuable to the person reading it,
Yeah.
And they go, okay. And, and then, with the cover, they gave me a lot of say. I had very strong design opinions.
I was thinking you would.
But there was this one option that I was like, I'd be really happy with that. and it's ended up being the kind of the brand that's continued into the second book, and I imagine the third as well. So
amazing. And listen, because it's interesting that you have this complete confidence that you can do this thing, and also it sounds like trust that it's going to work out well, even though you're not in charge of the entire project.
Yeah.
How do you, I mean, is that just a natural thing for you, or did you have to do some mind management around that?
I would say for the most part, it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely places in it. But this is what comes when you're working with people who are really great at what they do as well.
Right. So this is also about finding the perfect partners.
Yes. And the people at Bloomsbury, everyone I've interacted there, it's been great. Just every email, every phone call, every meeting, like there's no, and we're now working on the third book together. So this has been, a long-standing partnership.
Yeah. What is it?
And
7-8 years or something?
Not that long, actually. I was thinking, how long would it? Maybe it's 5 years, something like that. Yeah. But I think that's what comes when you're working with people who are a good match for you.
Yeah.
As in, they're smart too.
Exactly, right. That's
and they're good at what they do.
It.
Yeah. Yeah.
They get you, basically. And they also don't, they know what they don't need to send you, or what they don't need to ask you, or don't need to tell you, or don't need to bother you with, because you will have thought of it.
Yeah. And it's the same, like Julia, my agent as well. Like there's been times where, because once you have a book out, even more opportunities come your way, and people are like, would you like to consult on this app? Can we send you this thing? Would you like to do this workshop? It doesn't stop, which is amazing. And that's what everyone wants to happen. But that's where I can get very overwhelmed with when things are being asked of me, especially that volume of things being asked. And I just go into ostrich mode. But that's when Julia, my agent, and the team that work within my business are all very good at saying, hey, we can do those things. Like there's been times where Julia's had to say to me, Maisie, this is my job as your agent. You don't even have to answer these things. You just send them to me. But that's the challenging thing for me, because I'm so resourceful, so able to do all these things, that then suddenly when there's things where it's like, oh, I actually find that hard, and there's other people and it's their job to do these things. Like
I have an episode on what I think is called Smart People Problems Asking for Help, right? Or accepting help.
Yeah.
Because in theory, we can do anything, but we might not be very efficient at it. We may not enjoy it very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So accepting
that's a huge area of growth for me on a continual basis, really. Yeah.
And what would your advice be to someone who's like, okay, this is all very, very fine and nice for you, Maisie, but I'm surrounded by idiots. Right? Like, and I think there's a lot to say about that as well. Usually it's not that black and white, but a lot of smart people are like, where are the other smart people to collaborate with, to work with? I mean, how is there any tips on how to magically or magnetically attract them? How do you think you do
that's the thing. I think I just lure people in somehow.
Ah, interesting.
I'm not sure how, but I think there is some kind of magnetism that happens, right, on both parts.
I think from my perspective, it is also really sort of showing up the way you are, right? Because if you're trying to hide that you're smart, they're not going to know, are they? Yeah.
Yes. And I know of this fantastic membership that's designed for smart people as well.
Right. That's launching right now.
So there are places, but I think what I would say is we all have a tendency to do this as humans, to say, oh no, that doesn't exist, or where I live, or in the
Exactly
field
right.
that
Where I
I'm
live, in my town.
We find barriers,
Yeah,
and put them up, and they don't even exist in the first place.
or in my profession,
so I think
right? Like all the
yeah,
the thoughts. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's just that, can we be in that unknown of, well, I don't know where they are, but being open to the possibility that your people are out there, and that there's people who are a good fit for what you want to do, and maybe want to collaborate or provide that intellectual or social stimulation, or to just be in those environments, because they exist. Maybe not as much as we want to, which I know is why you've set up the memberships. Like,
community.
okay, we do need a place.
Exactly, but that's the beauty of like living in this day and age. I mean, I think when I look back on my dad, it was quite like, I think we would have had a much more fun life and been way more successful and way less lonely and misunderstood if the internet had actually fucking existed.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
yeah,
it's so different for us. We can reach the entire world. And that is such a blessing. We don't need to sort of be limited to the local pub. No disrespect. I mean, but the odds that I'm going to meet people I get on well with my local pub are relatively low.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite fortunate with where I live, because even though it's it's a kind of regular sized British seaside town, but there is like a lot of creativity there, and there's a lot of interesting people doing interesting things. So, there is that potential there for me, and I still prefer online communication.
Yes,
I prefer the phone calls, the voice notes back and forth, that's just what I prefer. So, even though there are people I connect with locally and in person, my closest friends are people that I've spent very little physical time with, or have never met in person yet.
Amazing, right? And it's so, and I love that you're saying this, because it's good to also normalize this, because I think a lot of people have this sort of experience like, oh, I really actually enjoy meeting all my friends from all over the world, like on Zoom, or even my friends from like, a couple of miles away on Zoom. I enjoy that much more than meeting them, live or at a physical location, and sort of them feeling bad about that and sort of questioning themselves, thinking, but then do I actually really like them? Right. And then the whole story starts spinning. Are these real friendships? Do I even have friends? Yes, you do. Right. Can we just
that's the thing. It's just, if you can skip all that judgment and just be in whatever you define a successful relationship to be, because for me, I do prefer it to be that way, because there's less for me to consider. Right, I'm not having to think about eye contact and this and that, and there's not additional things. Like there's a local cafe that I go to a lot. I've tried changing my routine and not going there, and it's impossible for me to. And so I love going there, and I do work from there most mornings, have coffee and breakfast, and Paul, my partner, will often come in and like get a takeaway. And he will say, well, why don't we have breakfast together sometime? Which already, like, that's a struggle for me, because I'm like, but this is where I work, But we tried
function.
it. Yeah, exactly. But we tried it. And that's when I realized, oh, I really struggle to hang out with other people in this space, because I can't differentiate the different sources of audio.
Yeah.
So although I can be here on my own working, and I can do like a sentence here, a sentence there to people, trying to sustain a conversation across the table when I can also hear every other conversation that's happening in the place, and I have to work so hard to hear what the person opposite me is saying, is stressful, not enjoyable, and exhausting.
Yeah.
And when I put that together, I'm like, oh, it's not just that I like to work here, it's that actually there's no point, because it's just not enjoyable. It's not good for our relationship to have this experience together.
Yes.
So
let's not do this. Yeah. So anybody out there worrying that they prefer meeting people like over Zoom, or at least some people, it's totally legit. Right?
yes.
So legit to just listen to your preferences. There's usually a reason for them.
Yeah. And it's the same with me. Like sometimes at Zoom, it's like the video's too much for me. I'm like, no, it's like, I do in my online membership, I do videos there. That's like 1 or 2 a week that I'm doing. Whereas like my one-on-one clients, it's audio only. And, it's just, I think, but like you said, it's just when we're able to be explicit and clear with ourselves about what works for us, and then just be clear with other people.
Yeah. It's the best thing ever. Okay, another thing I'm super curious about, and I think listeners will be too. How did you finish your book? Like, as someone who isn't finishing a book right now, but desperately wants to. How do you manage your mind around it, right? How did you structure it? How did you?
Oh, well, this is interesting because I'm in it at the moment, because my
third book.
Yeah, the third one. So the first one, the publishers, Bloomsbury, were like, well, basically we'll give you over a year to write it. And Julie and my agent and I kind of looked at each other a bit concerned. Because for me, in my head, I was like, that's way too long.
Yeah. Like,
I just knew there's no point, because I just won't start it for ages.
Exactly. And then you'll write it in 3 months or whatever.
Yeah. And Julia was just like, well, if we're having this conversation with you, there's going to be at least 4 other authors having conversations about the same topic. So we want to be ahead of the curve. Let's get it out. Which,
like, it's a zeitgeist thing probably, and we want to be the first.
Yeah. So we were kind of riding that wave when it was really all kind of in the media and things, which was great. But it meant I needed to write. I think we signed the contract at the end of January, and it was due at the end of June.
Okay, so that was pretty tight.
Yeah. And when I signed the contract, Nelson was in nursery for 2 mornings a week.
Whoa. Okay, you like a challenge.
And he was also, his nursery also very helpfully closed for all of the Easter break and the half-term holidays and things. And I just remember like writing it with him having a fever next to me, watching Fireman Sam, and me just. But it's kind of helpful, like when kids are like actually really ill, they're not actually able to do much, and when they're sleeping, you can actually work. But kind of when they're not so ill, that's annoying.
That's the hard part.
So I think it really was all of that frustration. So let's say, the 18 months preceding me actually writing it, I'd been wanting to write, not being able to. And it's like, a racehorse not being being held at the starting line for ages. And then they finally go. And that it just goes. So it was that. And it was just so important to me that it was like, I think I felt a lot of rage when I was writing it as well, like in a very useful, like,
that
kind of,
that could fuel you.
Yeah. And it was really infused into it as well. So it just, I mean, there was a lot of pressure to writing it. I didn't have the best mental health by the end of it.
That was going to be my next question, right? Did you like pressurize yourself to make it quote unquote perfect? How easy was it to sort of send it into editors, all that kind of stuff?
I mean, I felt pretty good about it. I mean, the contract was for like, 70,000 words, and I handed it in. It was 110, and it ended up being 124 by the time we'd edited it. And, so the Dutch book is actually, they split it into 2 books.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because it was just
interesting. By the time it was translated, it was like too big. So they split it into 2 books. So, but I think, I guess I was thinking maybe that I was only going to write 1 book. So it all had to go,
this was it.
Yes. It all has to go in.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was so much perfectionism there. There definitely was. I wouldn't say it's perfectionism, but the standard that I had for what I wanted it to be in terms of being, scientifically rigorous for a book that's not necessarily the most sciencey, but me feeling like it held up.
It's solid.
According to the research, and I do think that's a part of it that I struggled with. Sorry? Oh, no, thank you. I think the part that I did struggle with it was in terms of me wanting to be really sciencey with things and reference absolutely everything at the end, but then you're like, this isn't a book for professionals, although professionals have read it. Yeah. So that was a struggle for me.
And how did you navigate that? Because it's like raising the bar super high, right? What lots of smart people tend to do.
I had to keep coming back to who is the book for. And I had this one particular friend who lived locally and was actually a childhood friend of mine as well. And I just thought, she's who this book is for. She meets the kind of average demographic of who we would want to be buying the book. So I was just thinking, well, if I was in the pub with Gemma, is this what I'd be saying?
Right.
And that was really great, because up until that point, it was like a bit of this, a bit of that. And I was just writing for so many people. That's when the perfectionism was coming in. But that was like fear of criticism.
Right.
So every paragraph, it's like, oh, no, but they could think I'm saying this and what, And so it was like very defensive writing.
Yeah.
And so once I got rid of that, then I was able to just write.
And this is something I see with a lot of my clients, like super smart, also very frustrated because they're constantly holding themselves back. Because in their head, there's this one professor or whoever, like this expert in their field they admire, and who they are imagining like raising their hand and saying, I'm sorry, this is complete bollocks, right? Yeah. Or whatever their version of that is. So I love that you were able to navigate that and sort of overcome that to fucking put the book out there. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, it did come up, especially around publication time, is because you're like, oh, it's going to be out there. People are going to be saying things, so that does come up. But I just kept coming back to, I didn't write the book for these 10 people that I keep thinking about.
Yes. Okay. Everybody who is like putting off their publications, even if it's just your LinkedIn post or, your novella. Yeah. You're not writing for those 10 people who have an argument with it.
Yeah. So it was, and I also knew that there would be multiple chances to edit things as well. And I think you have to trust your sense of when it's time to hand it over and get feedback. Because it's like, I could keep working on this, but why would I expend that effort when I don't know what anyone else is thinking about this yet?
Okay, so this is, again, I think not everybody thinks this way or realizes this. It's kind of like the 80-20 rule also, in a way, right? Like, I could like work like mad and maybe it will get slightly better, or I could hand it over to the professionals and then,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And there's definitely things that I would have spent far longer on. And I mean, we culled a whole chapter because it was just like, this is just too, and that would have been the one that probably I would have spent more time on it. But it was like, this is just, this
That's
is
the
one
perfect example.
Yeah. This is one framework too many to add in to, when it's a book for the general public with people who don't know the difference between their vagina and their vulva, and like this is like really radical information to them. You don't need to suddenly be banging on about Chinese medicine as well.
Yeah.
It's like
adding 20 footnotes.
Yes.
And and like a bibliography with 60 books and papers. Oh, so what was it like when it got published? How did it feel?
I think this was before I had trained as a coach. I mean, I trained as like a health coach, but that's completely different, to thing, what we know as coaching.
Yeah.
And I think it was a relief to have it out there. Exciting. But it's also that huge anticlimax of like, nothing's changed. I mean, everything's changed, but what I say to my clients all the time, you achieve a goal, you still have your brain. Like it doesn't disappear.
Yep.
It's a package deal.
You're still the same human with the same brain.
So,
and now some more time.
Yes. But I didn't know that. I was kind of having the experience of it, but I didn't have that lens of understanding that that's what was going on. So it's just a bit weird. And there is this kind of cognitive dissonance and kind of straddling different identities, because especially in a small town, when you've got people recognizing you, but
you're an author.
Like you're an author, and like changed my life, and like people would like start crying because of the impact that the books had on them, and all these amazing things. But like, as my good friend Mars is fond of saying, you still poo.
Exactly.
Right.
You still sweat, you still piss, you still poo. Nothing changes, hopefully.
Nothing. Yes, exactly. So nothing has changed. So it's, and I do think this is my sense of just what happens with our self-concept, is that we're always a bit behind who we actually are, and that's certainly been true for me, and that's something that, well, I still wrestle with. It comes up.
Lag, basically.
Yeah.
So stuck in a sort of former identity, or I prefer to call it incarnation, actually, because identity is like so much more complicated. I don't think we switch identities. We just have constant new incarnations with the same core identity, right? And to other people, it can look very different. I think a lot of smart people, also because we move so quickly through different subjects, so much faster than some other people.
Well, that was really fun for me when you pointed this out, right? Because so then, more recently, so it was basically like I had this specialist subject for almost 20 years. And then I went through like this 2-year period of kind of being like wrestling with it, like still doing it, but kind of not really wanting to in the way that I had, and trying to figure that out. And you and I had a conversation one day where I was like, I just feel like I've woken up and that special interest is just gone. I still use those, I still use it as a tool, for sure.
That knowledge is forever part of you.
But it's not the main thing that it kind of is, but it's just so obvious to me. It's so known to me that it is my go-to. I use it all the time in my life, but it's it's like brushing my teeth.
Yes.
And I remember you saying, I don't remember exactly what you said, but along the lines of like being surprised at having a special interest for that period of time, because smart people often kind of cycle through them quicker.
Yeah,
than
the
that.
higher burn rate, unless they find ways to stack interest or like diversify somehow, right? And keep it interesting in that way.
So I just love that in the moment. You know, like when you hear someone else say something, you're like, yes, that's helpful to know.
Yes. Yeah. And I think too many people worry about like, oh my God, I am now leaving this thing behind, especially if you see it as an identity. That's another reason why you don't want to call it your identity. Like, and I've invested so much in this, and how can I just let go of that? And you don't need to let go of anything. It's always going to be part of you. You're just taking it with you.
I'm not working as an acupuncturist anymore. I use Chinese medicine all the time in how I think about things and how I explain things to clients, so that lens of understanding is also still there. You just even that blooming RHS gardening course that I hated doing and like, why on earth was I actually doing this? I still use that all the you know, that understanding of the seasons. You know, so much of my work is about a seasonal approach. So I think often when we're looking at special interest and autism specifically, there's, I know like some autistic people who are, oh no, it's this and these things aren't related at all and they're never going to be useful. And it's like, well, first of all, I think we can question, does it have to be useful? Like, why can't you just be interested in whatever it is?
Yeah, and have some fun.
Yeah. But also, you just have no idea how these things are going to come together. And when you have a smart mind, you always find ways of bringing it together.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed this first part as much as I did. If you want to learn more about Maisie's work, check out her website, www.maisiehill.com, which has all the amazing things she does, including her podcasts, which again, I highly recommend. So maisiehill.com. And I can't wait to share the second part of this interview with you, where we actually dive even deeper into Maisie's unique way of running a multiple six-figure business. Hey, smart human. You're probably listening to this podcast because you want to learn how to manage that smart mind of yours. And the first step is actually getting your bearings, doing a little brain audit. And I have the perfect tool for that, the Mapping Your Unique Brain Workbook. And you can actually download it for free at www.coachkramer.org/brainmap. So that's coachkramer.org/brainmap. Go check it out and play with it and take your first step to managing your smart mind.